actually push someone through, someone like Bernie is actually worthy of and has a chance at and can actually commits to real transformational change. But it's just not the way it is with voting anymore. It's taking it downhill. It's frankly sad.
So what you're proposing is, in order to get my voice heard, what I will do is help put into office a candidate who is dedicated to destroying the prospects for human life on Earth by racing towards environmental catastrophe, who is stacking the entire judiciary with young lawyers who, for a generation, will be able to block any progressive legislation, who will continue to dismantle the arms control regime, which is somewhat protecting us from nuclear war, who will, I can go on and on. I will do that because that'll help me get my voice heard. No, I'm sorry, it won't.
Professor, I wouldn't argue that I am helping Trump. I would argue that if the Democratic Party, if Joe Biden as a candidate were unwilling to concede these very common sense concessions that would help him in electoral context and would also be the right thing to do, that it is he who would be enabling Trump, and that framing the onus as decidedly on the voter instead of the politician who's in a position of power to actually affect the outcome is wrongly doing a kind of voter shaming that continues to have the effect of suppressing the vote among people who are, I think, very valiantly asking for a better world.
That we know. Like, that is something that I think has been proven in studies to say, like, if you come at it, like, there's nothing more that, like, picture this situation. Like, you're not entirely committed to the Democratic Party. For example, maybe you're like a, like, African-American mom, waitress, or something like that. You're not committed to the Democratic Party. Don't feel like your life has changed for you much. But you get, and like your wages haven't gone up under Obama, like life hasn't good under Trump. Maybe, I mean, like the handling of the pandemic's been bad, but like you just feel like whatever happens, you've been working maybe in the same restaurant for a while, you haven't really gotten any like step forward, any kind of economic security, even though that you've been working every day and like in a hard way for like your entire life, and you like your material conditions don't really change, and then you have people like talking into your TV and be like, well, you have to vote, and if you don't vote, you're helping Trump. Like, I mean, again, making the case to vote for Joe Biden, that is a perfectly fine case, but yelling at people, especially like people who supported Bernie Sanders, people who are like, because they saw, especially because they're coming from a position where they had been screwed out and screwed over all their life, and they saw Bernie Sanders as the only person who could actually make a real change for them. And then now Joe Biden like beats him the way that, especially the way that he beats him, and you go to that person and say, you are a fascist enabler and scum if you don't vote for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I think they have absolutely every right to stick double middle fingers right up at you and say, hey, buddy, hey, Democratic Party, what have you done for me lately? Nothing. Come and earn my vote. Like, you can still choose to give it to him because you think Trump's a existential threat, but asking the Democratic Party, and demanding the Democratic Party, choose your vote, or actually come earn your vote, and is, I think, a fundamental thing. And there is unquestionably high amounts of just deep distaste the Democratic Party has for the base and for just its voters in general. Like, people who it doesn't already, who it thinks it already has under its wing, they will just like treat like scum because they're already in the wagon, and nothing matters anymore after that.
And yes, using the vote, the only real tool they have to directly communicate with their elected officials to influence.
Totally wrong. That's the establishment view, and you shouldn't buy into it. The vote is not the only tool you have.
Well, one of the only. I didn't say exclusive officials. Voter shaming that continues to have the effect of suppressing the vote among people who are, I think, very valiantly asking for a better world. And yes, using the vote, the only real tool they have to directly communicate with their elected officials to influence.
Totally wrong. That's the establishment view, and you shouldn't buy into it. The vote is not the only tool you have.
Well, one of the only. I didn't say exclusively.
It's the least of the tools that you have. That's the establishment view. You're a spectator, not a participant. Do the vote, go home. The real
So you're like supposed to go do a women's march, like
politics is constantly working to change the conditions under which political figures will be compelled to shift their views. That's real politics. Every once in a while, an event comes up called an election. You have to take 10 minutes to decide, am I going to keep the worst guy off, or is it not worth bothering? Often it's not worth bothering. This time it is very much worth bothering. And we have a choice. Will I take 10 minutes to get rid of a true monster who's going to have devastating effects? Or will I not do it? Because maybe someday that will help make my voice be heard under far worse circumstances. That's a simple choice. It's not a matter of just the vote. What you do if you're sensible is say, look, this guy is a major monster. We've got to get rid of him. I'll take 5 minutes to do it. Then I'll go back to the kind of real politics which changes consciousness, awareness, environment, sets the conditions.
I mean, honestly, like that just now sounds like he is entering like almost like and I hate to say it because it's definitely like where we need to be. It's definitely the right place to get to, I think. Like, honestly, it would be incredible. But like that's kind of similar, I think, to Brianna saying that, oh, we gotta do this like, mass mobilization of voters. Like, we are not, like, the left wing isn't organized. It's just not organized to that level at all, where we have the right type of people. We just don't have like those kind of leaders in such mass number, and we don't have a, I think, strong and affirmative base, which is what, like 20% of the Democratic Party, like uncommittedly, or not like just without reservation supporting Bernie Sanders. Maybe it's going to be more now. Like, is that enough people? Like, are there people who in a kind of campaign would kind of come along, and maybe it's more than 20, maybe it's like closer to 25, 20, like, is there enough people who are going to just come out and say, right, go back to all this kind of operations? Like, what is this, or like very, very abstract term that I think people who are like deeply involved with like the history of leftism and all that stuff, and like they read all the terms that they're up on, like they did all their homework and stuff like that, who are like, we got to go back to the fundamental basis of, like, what does that look like? Does that look like leading a protest, for example, like the Women's March? Does that look like, well, look where that got us? Nowhere, literally nowhere. It's just a giant display of pretty colors, and people go home. But I honestly think that voting is incredibly important. If you're able to do it in a, like, kind of, if you're able to form a big enough voting block, like, that is how real change is done in this country. Like, real change in this country does not happen often. Like, if you think about it, like, it happened, I think, in a big way in 2010, because and kind of the early 2010s, like, because that is what set the Republicans up for kind of the situation they have now. It happened during the New Deal era. It happened because I think in large part, except for, I guess you could kind of say, the civil rights movement, although people in some cases that was kind of, I say that was more of a 50-50 situation. Like, voting, like the real kinds of economic changes, like, voting has to happen. The people have to come in and step up. I think that it's definitely more with the economic changes than the social changes, because, I mean, there are much more kind of social changes happening kind of more in the 1960s, and kind of less so spiritual, and more so spiritual, less so economic, I meant to say. But it really kind of shows you, I think, that you got to have a much more... You gotta have, I think, like it's a definitely, I think, multi-dimensional situation, because, like, voting can really, if you vote in a unified way, that is more effective, because, like, I just don't get what that does that doesn't make any kind of anywhere near a difference in the anywhere near term. Like organizing in a way that like what is the end goal there? What's the process of like organizing and doing the quote unquote real politics that Noam Chomsky is talking about? Is it canvassing? Is it like signing people up for things? I don't get it. If you're able to create a unified voting bloc, that I think that has the most amount of power, and that will be done for organizing. But voting is like incredibly important. It's so important. I think that is such a big deal, because you need the people in there, you need the representatives, because I just don't get ignoring electoral politics, because like you need to get some people in there who are going to, because that's where all the policy comes from. Like there's not the government, and then there's some, like the government's the only game in town. Like you got to elect some people somewhere if you want any kind of representation. Like I think that's so crazy. Just like voting doesn't. It's not the only thing. I mean, it's not, obviously. I think you organize to vote more effectively, but you also have to vote. Like that's incredibly important. I think that's what makes the whole system work.
Under which any political figure will have to react. That's left politics. None of this business about concentrating on the election the way the establishment wants you to do. And certainly if the choice now is between 4 more years of monstrous activities, which may actually destroy the prospects for human life on Earth, and will certainly make doing anything we want far more difficult. The choice is either that or voting against him and then going back to the activist work that changes conditions and will compel them to move towards more progressive ends.
Why can't people adjust the third party thing?
You don't concentrate
I don't get
on the
it.
vote. The vote is the least of politics. That's establishment propaganda.
Professor, you mentioned earlier that activism has moved Biden to the left over the course of the general election campaign. That's curious to me, because what I've seen is Biden resisting moving to the left. One famous note, out of the DNC Unity Commission, the Sanders-Biden Unity Commission, one of the recommendations was postal banking, letting the post office operate as essentially a credit union. And it was reported that Biden made a phone call to the banks and told them, don't worry about that. That's just something for the Warren people. We're not actually going to do that. So my question to you is, how has Biden been moved to the left?
Well, very clearly. What you're saying is...
And again, you can say he's been moved to the left on paper, and you can point to all these pieces of evidence, but I think what he's saying there, and I think that's a very, very valid criticism at this point to make, is that are we sure that it's anything substantive that we can count on once he's in office? And that I think he has unquestionably not proven.
He didn't move as far as you wanted. True, he didn't move as far as I wanted. But take a look at the programs. So you look at the campaign, take, say, climate change, the most important thing.
The programs are fine. Like, the programs are great. Like, the programs are, like, they're perfect. Like, they're again, they're not as good as we should have them, like you said. But, can you really be convinced that he's going to follow those programs once he's in office? Like, I wish I had him here when he was in, hopefully Virgil will be my voice as I scream here from the sidelines. It's my director's commentary, I guess you could say, of this situation. But it's like, I just don't see the proof that Biden is going to really fall into these policy positions. I mean, I guess, again, unless the left is successful in making him. And how would that happen? I think in large part through pressure, through electoralism, through elected officials there, and through the promise of more people going the way of William Lacey Clay and Joe Crowley, and more people like Eleanor Marinelli and all the squad-like people being brought into Congress.
Program is way to the left of any previous one, certainly to the left of what the DNC wants, calling for nowhere near far enough, but much farther to the left. I can quote it for you if you want, or you can look it up. Same on other issues. Not as far as I would like, but it has been moved. Same is true of everyone in the past. Lyndon Johnson didn't go as far as I would have liked on civil rights.
And I mean, again, I think like